The ideal reader would be somebody who loves mystery, particularly mystery that has historical twists to it. People love history. People enjoy it. And when you have murder with history, it's mystery with murder, and it's just irresistible. So I think that the reader who would really enjoy it, of course, the fans of Sherlock Holmes, beyond question, but also those mystery lovers who like a good historical twist to it, they would enjoy it, I believe. And this novel, it's entitled A Scandalous Affair, we have blackmail. One of the most powerful men in the British government, the Chancellor of the Czech, is being blackmailed. He's being blackmailed by an unknown person who possesses tawdry photographs showing his granddaughter in love encounters, romantic encounters, with a man other than the aristocrat she's engaged to marry. And of course, he's being blackmailed. And the other side of that coin is that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, sits on the War Council, which oversees all of the major military operations on the continent. And can you imagine how disastrous it would be if he were blackmailed into giving up those plans? So they asked Sherlock Holmes' daughter to come in and solve this puzzle for them. And in she comes. And her task, is not only to expose the blackmailer, but to procure those salacious photographs before damage, irreversible damage, is done to the Chancellor and his granddaughter. So, if you enjoy romance, some murder, blackmail, history, all bound up in a novel, A Scandalous Affair is the book for you.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. It's an author podcast where we get to talk to great people from around the world. And Leonard is here on the show today. He lives in a very historical place in the U.S. He has traveled. He has spent time on location, which helped him write an amazing book and series. And he continues to write and share his stories. I'm really excited to have Leonard here on the podcast to talk about his journey. Leonard, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. I'm so glad to have you here.
It's good to be with you, Dave.
Excellent. Tell everybody a little bit about the historical significance of where you live in the U.S.
I live on Sullivan's Island, which is an island about 20 miles off of Charleston, South Carolina, and it's where the Civil War actually began. At the tip end of Sullivan's Island is a Fort Moultrie, and just prior to the start of the Civil War, the troops at Fort Moultrie decided they would get in rowboats and go across to Fort Sumter, which was a fort in the middle of the harbor, belonged to the federal government. But South Carolina said, no, that belongs to us. So federal troops said, we better intervene, and they sent their troops to occupy Fort Sumter. And South Carolina said, no, you can't stay, you have to leave. And the federal government said, no, we won't. So South Carolina militia opened fire on Fort Sumter, and that was the start of the Civil War.
Wow.
I think it was like 26 men went from Fort Moultrie to Fort Sumter. Interestingly, nobody was killed in the Battle of Fort Sumter. One man died because the cannon, which they were firing off as a salute, a farewell, exploded. But nobody died in battle.
Wow.
And I often think how tragic it was that I think it was 26 or 28 men who made that journey from Fort Moultrie to Fort Sumter, result in a war that killed over 600,000 people.
Right.
And it's just tragic when you think about it.
There's so many lessons we learn from history. I love hearing historical accounts and going to historical locations. We have many where I live in Niagara, so close to the U.S. border, and you can travel back in time and just stand in that place and try to imagine that time period and what it was like then. So I would love to walk the streets of your community and just stand in places where these events took place. That'd be a joy for me, and a humbling experience as well, to stand there and picture what that would have been like back then.
Oh, the history is here. It surrounds you all the time. And I think that's good. I think your past is part of you.
Right. And I think being on location in a place like where you're living, I think if I was going to write a book or a story or something around that event, I would want to be there and feel what does the breeze feel like coming off the ocean? What does it sound like? What does it feel like to be there? I think that would naturally kind of find its way into my writing, just being on location at that spot.
I think that's very true. It's also some interest that maybe the greatest mystery writer of all time, Edgar Allan Poe, lived on Sullivan's Island. Yeah.
Right.
And he wrote The Gold Bug on Sullivan's Island.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So much history. I love that.
It's all around.
It's all around you. Now, you're an author who took this love of history and your stories that you're writing, and you put yourself into another location completely, which you kind of replicated what we just talked about. You put yourself in London as a kind of backdrop to serve you as a writer as well. What was the move for you to uproot and go to London, and let's kind of flesh out together how that kind of impacted your writing?
It was no problem at all. I'll give you a brief history. At the time, I was a professor of medicine at UCLA, and I had come upon my 7th year, at which time I could take a sabbatical. So I decided, fine, I would take the sabbatical and do research in London. And I ended up at various hospitals, but one in particular was St. Bartholomew's, which of course was a hospital where Sherlock Holmes and Watson played around in. So my flat in London was about 15 minutes from 221B Baker Street, an easy walk. I knew West London very well, and I'm still very familiar with it. So when I write about West London or where Sherlock did or didn't go, I was there.
And okay, now how does that feed your writing, being on location? How do you adapt your surroundings into your writing then?
Well, it does in a number of fashions. For example, we all know about the fog of London, and it's a pea soup fog, a yellow. Until you've experienced it, you really don't know what it is, because it's so thick, you can't find your way around the corner. You have to be there for that. And you also have to be there for the weather, knowing that it's going to rain every day.
Yeah.
Or as they say, with brief periods of clearing. It rains every day. And it's just part of London. It's you live it, you're there all the time. And it's always a bit chilly there. I recall I was there, part of my sabbatical was during the summer. And it was nice. I thought it was very pleasant. It was 72 during the day, which to me was very, very pleasant. Of course, to the Londoners, that was like, wow, whoa, the heat. And I remember a headline, I think it was The Guardian, that said, 72 again today, no relief in sight. But yeah, I think it plays into it. And it's important you be familiar with the locale you're writing about.
Right.
Readers pick up errors very quickly.
Right.
Very, very quickly. And if you write about a place in an incorrect fashion and the reader picks it up, you've lost that reader.
Right.
as we all know, to read a novel and enjoy it, you have to go through something called a period of disbelief, a suspension of disbelief. You got to go through that. You have to envision yourself being at that place. And as soon as they pick up an error, that suspension of disbelief, it disappears. So you have to be certain of your locale.
It's interesting. Now, we have authors, Leonard, that are listening to the podcast. They're at the very beginning of their journey of writing their story and sharing their work with the world. You are at the finish line in that you've published, you've gone through the process. There are things that you know now that maybe you didn't fully understand when you first started writing many, many years ago. Is there anything that you can kind of share with an author audience that's listening to inspire them to write their story?
Yes, I can give you the facts. First of all writers, when they finish their novel, they believe this is an instant bestseller. This is one of the best novels ever written. It's grand. I'm so lucky to have written such a wonderful novel. And then it's submitted, and on more than a few occasions it's rejected, or if it's not rejected, it's accepted, but with 2 or 3 pages of changes that need to be made. And of course, that's devastating, having had this bestseller, instant fame, and they just took all that away from you. Well, the reality is that writing is difficult, and to come up with a really good novel does require revision, hard work and revision. There's no question about that. And you have to be prepared for it. You have to be prepared for it. And I've often heard it said, and I believe this to be true, you show me a good novel, I'll show you a good editor.
Interesting. Okay.
And so you have to understand there are going to be changes made. You have to understand it's a long road. But at the end of that road, it's what Oliver Wendell Holmes referred to as the intoxicating pleasure of penmanship.
I like that.
There's something very, very magical about seeing your name on the cover of a book.
Right. Very rewarding. Now, you've seen your name on many books. When did you start your journey as an author? It was many years ago, right?
Oh yeah, I started it almost 40 years ago. And I was at the time in training at UCLA in the medical center, and we had a patient who had a severe type of anemia, just to take you back in time. And this patient was making antibodies against her own red blood cells. So it was just a terrible situation. And whenever we would transfuse her, her antibodies would destroy the transfused red blood cells. So things looked very bad. And then we came across a family that was really remarkable. It was a family that had no antigens on their red blood cells. No A, no B, no Rh factor.
Nothing.
O negative with nothing. And we said, gee, I wonder if she would tolerate this. So we got a unit of that blood and gave it to her. And she tolerated it beautifully. And that gave us time to use the drugs to suppress the production of those antibodies. The reason I'm telling this story is it came to my mind at the time. Just suppose somebody was born and they had no antigens, no proteins on their cell surface. They would be a universal donor.
Right.
So I, in my mind, said, I think I could write a brief story or novel about a young woman who was born with no antigens on her cells, and she would be the universal donor. And that story came together in my mind, and people found out about her. And of course, elderly rich people who were dying and needed a transplant were after her and wanted her organs at all costs and what have you. And I wrote that novel. It was called Transplant. And I thought it was fun doing. I enjoyed it. But I was in training, and I didn't think much more about it. I submitted it, and it was accepted. But I still thought that was the end of the story until it went through 10 reprints.
Wow.
and was optioned by several studios in Hollywood. So I was smitten. That did it.
That was it.
Yeah. Now I wasn't able to write all during my time at UCLA and what have you, because medicine takes up a fair amount of time, and you have this crazy schedule in which you get home at 7 o'clock at night and throw down dinner and then immediately begin to write and hope the phone doesn't ring. It's difficult. But later on in my career, I began to practice half-time, and that gave me more time to write. And it worked out fine for me. I've managed to write 21 novels and enjoyed every one of them.
Wow. How have you grown over the years as an author, as you write all these books and you continue to share these stories? When you look back at Transplant and you look at your most recent book, how have you grown? How are you different?
I think in a number of ways. Number one is the old saying, don't tell us how you feel, show us. And I think that's a difficult lesson to learn sometimes. You have to learn how to show emotion, not tell about it. That doesn't work. Show it. Number two is, and I've had editors tell me this, as you go through particularly a series, you have to let that character change. You can't have somebody who starts off as your hero or heroine at the age of 20, and then 10 years later, she or he's the same person, because they're not. They're different. And you have to be able to change them, but give them more depth as you do it. That makes the character even more interesting and the reader more interested in reading. So I think that you grow as a writer by writing, but it's tough. It's tough to change. It's tough to write. I think I mentioned this to you before. Hemingway, who I think is at the top of the list, America's greatest writer. I mean, to me, nobody comes close. But somebody once asked him about writing, and he said, oh, there's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down by a typewriter and bleed.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's difficult. Mark Twain, who also was a great writer, by the way, had some wonderful sayings. And we all know some of the sayings attributed to him. But in writing, he said something which I read, and at first I didn't truly understand, but I came to understand it in short order. And he said, and he was a writer, by the way, he was a novelist, Huckleberry Finn, etc., were marvelous works of art. But he said, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between the lightning and the lightning bug. And it's true.
Right.
Sometimes you have to just fight to find the right word. And as a writer, you can't keep using the same word over and over again. You can't do that. You can't say most 50 times in one paragraph. Yeah. You can't have somebody speaking and say, he said, she said, he said. You have to change it a little bit. You know, he shouted, she whispered.
Yeah.
You have to move it around a bit. But again, the right words are tough to come by sometimes. Tough. But that's all right. You know when it's right. And equally as important, your editor knows when it's right.
Yeah. That's a good combination too. A great author and a great editor together working on the same project. I think that's just a beautiful dance between the two.
Oh yeah. You know, people such as Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald, they had great editors. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. They had great editors. And the other misconception is you have to have volume to a novel. You have, it's got to be 300-400 pages, etc. And my feeling is you tell the story. How many pages it takes, but tell the story. Hemingway won a Nobel Prize for The Old Man and the Sea. It's, great work of art. I've read it a dozen times, and it means something different to me each time. But The Old Man and the Sea is 120 pages.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
150 pages. Right?
Right.
Then you read somebody writing horror stories that's 700 pages, and you come to realize of those 700 pages, 500 are
Right.
useless.
Yeah.
Right? So the reality is just tell your story. Don't worry about how many words. Tell your story. If it needs to be expanded, things need to be dropped or whatever, your editor will tell you. Don't worry about that. Just write your story.
Interesting. Now, you have a love for all things Sherlock Holmes, and the fact that you were able to walk the streets that Sherlock Holmes walked with Watson and all that. Again, that'd be a thrill just to walk those pathways and see what they saw back in the day. What for you is the light and excitement specifically for Sherlock Holmes as that person and that character? Why is that so important to you?
Sherlock, as you know, is the world's most famous detective.
Right.
It's quite remarkable. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about Sherlock over 100 years ago. Yet today, he's still the most famous detective in the world. Now, what makes him so special? Why do we remember him? There's 1,000 answers, and I'm not sure any of them are good. But I think the reason is that Sherlock is special with his talents and skills, and in other ways, he's just like you and me. He has his habits. He can be bored. He can lay around and do nothing. He has to be stimulated to get off of his butt. Mm-hmm. Sherlock, that's us. That's what we do.
Right.
We can sit around and do very little. But once we get in motion, we do fine things. So Sherlock is that combination of what we want to be and what we are.
Interesting.
That's how I look at it. Yeah. And it's just, you talk to real Sherlockians, my goodness, don't make a mistake.
No.
Don't make a mistake. Don't, whatever you do, don't refer to Sherlock Holmes as Sherlock, because in the novels, he's always Holmes. I have to understand that.
Yeah. Interesting.
But as you know, Arthur Conan Doyle got tired of Sherlock and killed him off.
Right.
There was such an outpouring. I mean, thousands upon thousands of letters that he had to bring Sherlock back to life. So I guess the public acclaim was something that Conan Doyle found irresistible.
And that leads you to be mesmerized and stimulated by the story of Sherlock Holmes, which you then have kind of taken it a little bit further beyond Sherlock Holmes and Watson as characters to include someone else in the story. Tell me kind of how you ended up going down that path.
It's kind of interesting. First of all, I don't think anybody can ever replicate Conan Doyle. I don't think so. I just don't believe that. If they try, it's false. It doesn't come across as true. There's one Conan Doyle, there's one Sherlock Holmes. However, you can give Sherlock's talents to someone else and thus bring at least part of Sherlock back to life. Now, how are we going to do that? I mean, we just can't pick somebody off the street.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Why not give him a hidden relative, somebody who we didn't know about, who has inherited some of his genes, some of his chromosomes, somebody who has that same deductive ability. Why don't we do that? And so it came to mind, well, let's give him a daughter, a brilliant daughter, who's young and attractive and who everybody underestimates. This is Victorian England, Edwardian England. This is a young, pretty girl. What kind of a detective is this?
Right.
She turns out to be remarkable because she is a template of Sherlock Holmes. He's remarkable in that result and that effect. And I thought that would be worthwhile doing. Now, how am I going to give Sherlock a daughter? Sherlock, of course, was a cold fella. He didn't want anything to do with women. You read his novels, never once is there any attraction to a woman. No affairs, none of that. Watson says the reason for that is Sherlock understands that love as an emotion might interfere with his finely tuned brain. So you have none of that. So how do we go about this? Well, I went about it by having him have a brief affair with Irene Adler, the only woman ever to outwit him, beautiful opera star. And she becomes pregnant. Unfortunately, she's married at the time, I must say, but separated at the time. And she comes back to see Holmes 9 months later, pregnant. But she's dying. She has toxemia pregnancy. She has weeks to live. Well, it's a problem. I mean, who's going to look after the child and what have you? Well, Sherlock's not going to be the father. You can forget that. So, but if anything, he's a puzzle solver. He likes to solve puzzles. So he calls up his friend John Watson, who's a physician, says, "I've got a problem. Let me tell you, we're going to solve it." And they arrange for Irene Adler to be admitted to St. Mary's Hospital in London and deliver the child, which she does. Unfortunately, she dies shortly after delivery. And Watson arranges for that child to be adopted by a well-to-do family. That child, name is Joanna, and she grows up to be a remarkably bright young woman who turns out to be a nurse. She's great at that. She's smarter than most of the doctors. But somehow her paths cross with Watson, and he learns that she's every bit as smart as her father was. So we have the reincarnation of Sherlock Holmes. She has his wit, she has his brain, and she has some of his unpleasant habits. She loves to smoke. She loves to smoke Turkish cigarettes. I mean, it's one after another.
Yeah. Interesting. Leonard, when I look at you as an author, I'm kind of curious if what percentage of you really resonates with Holmes, and what percentage of you, as with a medical background, really relates to Watson. If we could kind of divide you up into percentages, how do you kind of feel you're drawn to these two characters personally?
Well, I will answer that by people who've come up to me and said, I read that last novel, and that individual really kind of resembles me. Now, how do you respond to that?
Right.
Well, my response is, well, in a way, I guess he or she does. But only 50% of you is there. You guess what half.
There you go. There you go.
So I think that medicine does play a role, though, in Watson and in Joanna's detective skills. When I was at UCLA, I spent half time doing research, and I published over 100 manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals. So I know about research, and I know how to take clues and put them together. So I think that played a significant role in me wanting to have a detective who has this deductive mind, yet all along the road, I put down medical clues that she and her husband, John Watson Jr., collect and detect and put together. So yeah, I think that's part of it. I really do. I think that's also part of why I enjoy it, because I don't know what's coming next. You ask me, what's this next novel about? Well, I can tell you the beginning, and I can tell you the end. I can't tell you the beginning. In between there, things happen. After 3 or 4 chapters, the characters take off on their own. And I kind of sit back and write, but enjoy what they're doing.
I like that.
They got a life of their own. And when you reach that stage, that's when writing becomes more of a joy.
When you're developing your character and the story for your characters, with your extensive medical background and knowing what you know about medicine, they didn't know what we know in 2025 back then. So how do you give enough information to create the story based on what they would know about medicine back then to still carry the story? And are you ever challenged to add new information that they wouldn't know about in that time period?
Not really. Sometimes I've had some critics say, "Wait a minute, the electrocardiogram wasn't developed until," and I wrote back and said, "You're wrong. It was. Do better research, then write it to you."
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly.
I've got on occasion I've had to write and say, "Look, yeah, your statement was incorrect." And one woman wrote, she said, "I was so enjoying this novel, and then I found out he was measuring in inches, not centimeters, not the metric system. So I lost all interest." And I wrote her and I said, "Well, you should do your research because the British went from inches to the metric system in 1960, which was 40 years after Joanna's detective thrillers." She never answered. So you have to have some history. And I guess I'm fortunate in that I've often been a historian of medicine. I have a grasp. And you say, well, how far back does it go? Many years ago, my parents, God love them, were moving from the house they had to a condominium. And as you move, you find different things, whether you should hold them, discard them, or what. And they found something I had written as a junior in high school. When you're a junior in high school, you have to write something called the junior essay. It's an essay on whatever subject you want. Got to write 4 or 5 pages, etc. So you pick the topic, and I did. And they had a copy of that junior essay, and I'll never forget the first line I wrote. It read, "I am Edward Jenner." Edward Jenner is a physician who discovered the smallpox vaccine. All of our vaccinations that we have today are based on Jenner's observation and discovery. So even when I was 14 or 15 years old, somehow I could wish myself to be an Edward Jenner.
Wow.
Interesting story.
That's interesting. And look at you today. And all of the things you've accomplished and all the things you've learned and studied and the people you've helped. And also then, as an author, another act of your life, you're doing this as well. What I love is when I have a guest on as an author and unraveling your backstory and who you are, your education, your career, and see how that blends into your writing. I just think there's like a marriage there of all of the things you bring to writing that makes you so unique that someone else couldn't write these stories the way that you can because you're so unique. And I think for the authors listening, they might feel like they're a little inadequate in that there's so many great authors in the world. But you, as the author, are so uniquely talented and have these unique stories and education that would make your book different than anyone else's book because it's about your perspective.
Yeah. But I think you have to keep in mind, Dave, that there are really no ideas that are new.
Right.
Everything's been written about. Yeah. Everything. And people say, "Oh, no, that's not true." And I said, "Yeah, it is true." And they said, "Well, how about Jurassic Park?" That's a novel idea. I'm supposed to come back to life, terrorize people. I mean, it's a great idea. And it was written by Michael Crichton. Wonderful writer. He copied Arthur Conan Doyle. He copied him. And you say, well, how do you know that? Because in 1927, Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a novel that had explorers becoming lost in the Amazon, and they come to this mountain range and climb up to the highest plateau where they encounter dinosaurs who survived because they haven't been exposed to human civilization. And these dinosaurs, they're not too pleased with these new arrivals, and they attack them. They see them as a threat. So what we have is Arthur Conan Doyle talking about dinosaurs becoming part of life. Crichton did the same thing, except he used bioengineering to do it.
Right.
And people say, yeah, but how do you know he copied it? How do you know that? I said, oh, I have proof. And they said, well, did you talk to him? I said, I never met him. Then how do you know? And I said, well, because the sequel to Jurassic Park was entitled Jurassic Park, The Lost City. What was the title of Arthur Conan Doyle's 1927 novel, The Lost City?
Mm.
It was Michael Crichton paying homage to Arthur Conan Doyle.
There you go.
But look, that's how life goes. And, I don't like to pull out the scripture on you, but go to Ecclesiastes, and it says, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Has been done will be done again.
Right.
And it's true. So don't think that because you have an idea that people say, oh, that's been written about. Don't let it dissuade you. Keep the idea.
Yeah.
But change the characters, change the location, change the time, change the circumstances. And suddenly the story becomes yours.
Right.
And you have no regrets.
And that's what you've done in your book. You have the story of Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and now you have this supplemental character who becomes the main focus, but you're still paying homage to the main story, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Quite striking how that works.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that Holmes would appreciate a story like this about a daughter? Do you think that would be an interesting premise for him to contemplate in that mind of his?
I think he would have been convinced it happened, but I'm not sure he would have been convinced that she was as bright as he was. He really considered himself the best of the very best, and everybody else was sort of an underling who played a role in his great plays, but he really considered himself to be a cut above.
Yeah.
And he was.
Yeah.
He was. But I think he would have enjoyed it, yeah. I think he would have enjoyed seeing how his colleague John Watson, who's in the novels as well and acts as a guide and a supervisor to the daughter, I think he would have liked to have seen how John Watson turned out and what he did in his later years. So, yeah, I think he would have enjoyed it.
Is there any special information, without giving away any secrets for your book, is there any special significance to the family that raised the Holmes, his daughter at all? Is there any little parts in there that we can share without giving anything away?
Well, nobody knows very much about that.
Okay.
All they know is she grew up in a well-to-do family.
Okay.
She liked to read about crime stories. If she'd go to a theater where they were a play on murder, she knew who the murderer was before the first curtain fell.
Of course. Yeah.
Obviously, it's what. And unfortunate part, this is the early 1900s, and women couldn't be detectives. Just didn't happen. So she worked her way in by observing something which is in the first novel, in which she observes a man falling 3 stories from a building. He drops literally in front of her and dies. And of course, Scotland Yard says, well, this is suicide. And the man who died, Charles Harrelson, his sister comes to see Watson, who's still alive, still sees people, and offers advice. And she says, Dr. Watson, you have to help me. My brother didn't commit suicide. He didn't. It's unheard of. He was a gallant, wonderful man. He was a war hero. He was the leader of our family. He would have never done such a thing. Well, Watson is not terribly interested in suicide. That's not his cup of tea. But then his sister says, Dr. Watson, there are 2 varying accounts of what happened. One is given by a gardener a half a block away, and another is given by Joanna, whatever her last name is at the time, and it's totally different. And of course, Watson almost comes out of his chair because he's the only person in the world who knows the true father of this woman. Only people who knew, Irene Adler, who's dead, Sherlock, and John Watson. Well, Johnson, this is the chance. So he goes to the stately house where Joanna lives with her parents, and he walks in and he introduces himself, etc., and tells her why he's there. And he said, "We are here, Ms. Blalock, to investigate the death of Charles Harrelson." And Joanna shakes her head and says, "No, Dr. Watson, you're here to investigate the murder of Charles Harrelson." And that starts the whole story.
Oh, see? I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
For Leonard, for the readers, I want to make sure we include them as well. Tell me, who would your most recent book be a great read for? I want our audience to self-identify and go, "Oh, this is the perfect book for me, and I know someone else who's going to love this book as well, so I'm going to recommend this book to them." But tell me about, who is your ideal reader? Who do you have in mind for these books?
The ideal reader would be somebody who loves mystery, particularly mystery that has historical twists to it. People love history. People enjoy it. And when you have murder with history, it's mystery with murder, and it's just irresistible. So I think that the reader who would really enjoy it, of course, the fans of Sherlock Holmes, beyond question, but also those mystery lovers who like a good historical twist to it, they would enjoy it, I believe. And this novel, it's entitled A Scandalous Affair, we have blackmail. One of the most powerful men in the British government, the Chancellor of the Czech, is being blackmailed. He's being blackmailed by an unknown person who possesses tawdry photographs showing his granddaughter in love encounters, romantic encounters, with a man other than the aristocrat she's engaged to marry. And of course, he's being blackmailed. And the other side of that coin is that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, sits on the War Council, which oversees all of the major military operations on the continent. And can you imagine how disastrous it would be if he were blackmailed into giving up those plans? So they asked Sherlock Holmes' daughter to come in and solve this puzzle for them. And in she comes. And her task, is not only to expose the blackmailer, but to procure those salacious photographs before damage, irreversible damage, is done to the Chancellor and his granddaughter. So if you enjoy romance, some murder, blackmail, history, all bound up in a novel, A Scandalous Affair is the book for you.
Amazing. Well said, well written. Leonard, I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast. And I know you have lots of interviews coming up. You've done many as well around your book and everything. I'm going to include in the show notes a link to your website so people can follow up with you more and read more as well. And see, you have a link there for all your interviews and everything. It's exciting. All your books are listed. There's so many for people to fall in love with. So I love that we can have time together and bring people into your world who have not met you yet. I love discovering a new author. For me as a reader, it's really a thrill to get to talk to people like you, again, who share great stories and have such a huge library for us to fall in love with as readers. So much variety there as well. It's a pleasure having you on the show. What do you want to leave people with, Leonard, as we leave today? What's your kind of closing thoughts around your characters, your writing? Where would you like to go to end off our conversation?
I think my closing remarks would be as follows, and this to writers: don't be dissuaded. In a way, expect rejection, dejection, disappointment. That's part of the travel. It really is. There's no way to get around it. You don't write a novel the way it's shown on a Hollywood film of some very handsome fellow sitting at a desk scribbling when his wife comes in and says, "Oh dear, are you finished?" So just one more line and it's done, and then we can have lunch. It's not that way. It's you sitting down, usually at a kitchen table or what have you, struggling for the right words, the right thoughts to keep the flow going. And of course, everybody dreams of the fame and fortune, which rarely happen. Occasionally they do, but it's pretty unusual. What you have to understand is there is an immense amount of self-satisfaction having written a book. It's just, you've done something that very few people have. And I recall a conversation I had with another writer, and his comments just stuck in my mind. He said, nobody wants to write a novel. Everybody wants to have written a novel. Because writing is tough, it's hard. But at the end of the road, it's worthwhile. And after all, in life, isn't that true? The toughest tasks often give the biggest reward.
I love it. As you're listening, everyone, make sure you go check out A Scandalous Affair. Grab a copy for yourself. Grab a copy for someone you know and love. Leave a great review, because I know Leonard would love to hear your thoughts about the book and why it resonated with you and why you enjoyed reading it so much. I think that's a great thing that all of us can do. And when you go to Leonard's website, you will see book after book after book for you to fall in love with. You have so many great stories ahead of you by following Leonard's journey. And Leonard, again, such a privilege to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making time to be here.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And you might be interested to know that this morning I looked at the website for A Scandalous Affair on Amazon. I don't do it very often. I just like to see where it's at. And it's now had over 100 reviews, and it's gotten 5 stars.
Nice.
Which is, I've never had that before. So I think we've got us a really good novel. And people say, well, how do I know whether I would like it again? I'll tell you how. Go to the bookstore. Sit on a chair. Read the first 4 or 5 pages. If you're not hooked, put the book back. If you're really hooked, your next trip will be to the cashier. So
there you go.
I tell all the writers, get to it. Bon voyage.
There you go. Leonard, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We'll have links to all your information in the show notes. And keep writing, keep sharing your stories. I know you have to run to another interview, but thank you so much for being part of the show.
It's my pleasure, Dave, and perhaps when I come up with another novel, you and I can have another wonderful chat about the daughter of Sherlock Holmes.
I love it. I'll keep the door open and a seat ready for you, ready for your return. Thank you, Leonard.
Capital. Thank you so much, Dave.
Excellent.
You have a good day.
Hey, as we exit the podcast, as we leave out the door, I know the car's running. Somebody's eagerly waiting for you to get out there and go home. As we exit the podcast, I just want to ask, if you have time, I would truly appreciate it. We ask for you to do this for our authors. When you buy your book, we ask you to leave a review. Why? Because it means a lot to the author and it tells other people that the book is great. Now, you don't hear me ask for this very often, so I'm going to do this here because we're friends, right? You and I are friends. I would love a review of this show because it'll tell more people to come and listen to this podcast. So if you have Apple, wherever you're listening, there's probably some way to give a star rating or leave a comment about the show. YouTube, you can always leave comments on YouTube. Every episode's there. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a review, leave a rating, and share this with somebody. That's probably the best way to grow the podcast is for you to share it. And by listening to the end of the episode, like you're doing right now, tells all the apps this is a good podcast. So thank you for already helping me by listening to this part. But go leave a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And thank you for being part of the podcast family. Take care.